Something about these new ESA frames hits different, not the usual interesting anomaly type of different, but the kind that makes seasoned scientists go quiet. When ultra-high resolution imaging of 3I Atlas finally appeared online, there was this immediate collective pause in the astrophysics community, like everyone subconsciously registered that this moment was bigger than what we were prepared for. These are not abstract models or computer reconstructions. These are raw captures of an interstellar body less than 30 million kilometers away, taken from machines that never blink, never exaggerate, never speculate. And the very first glance already dismantles the safe assumption we all clung to, that this object was simply another cold rock thrown across the galaxy by cosmic randomness. Because these images do not look random at all. But here's where the tension starts. If ESA had this resolution, then NASA surely has even better. MRO's HiRISE is the most powerful orbital camera ever pointed at anything beyond Earth. And it was aimed directly at 3I Atlas during the same window. So why is NASA completely silent? Not preliminary thumbnails, not blurred teasers, not even still under review footnotes, nothing. ESA drops the bomb, and NASA goes dark. The timing is too tight to be coincidence, too precise to be routine data processing backlog. Something in this imagery is disruptive enough that the world's leading space agency may not know how to present it publicly without detonating consequences. And that's when the scale of all this becomes real. These frames do not feel like the first chapter of a scientific paper, they feel like the opening shot in a civilization-level plot twist. When you look at them, the natural reaction isn't, "Oh, that's a strange comet." The reaction is, "Why does this look engineered?" Because if it is engineered, or even if it merely behaves like a system not a rock, then the question isn't, "What is it?" anymore. It becomes, "Who built it?" And that's the moment where the silence becomes louder than the images. The moment you isolate the forward hemisphere and actually study what's printed on that surface, the illusion of natural object collapses almost instantly. Because random geology, whether cometary or asteroidal, never produces repeating geometry at scale. But 3I Atlas displays a grid-like structure with hexagonal units repeating across roughly 40% of the visible face. You don't get continuous honeycomb tessellation from random impacts, fragmentation, or thermal stress. You get that from logic. You get that from pattern. You get that from systems built to optimize structural efficiency. Biological organisms use hexagonal packing because it maximizes area while minimizing material. Engineers use hexagonal tiling because it distributes thermal loads evenly. Nature uses hexagons when there is internal purpose. That's the uncomfortable part, not that hexagons exist, but that they appear to exist with consistency. And it gets stranger. Those hexagonal tiles aren't just visually distinct. Their spectral response is slightly more reflective than the surrounding surface, only a few percentage points, but consistent across multiple angles. In astronomy, consistency beats speculation. The numbers are the numbers. That small differential reflectivity means those areas are likely composed of different material or coated intentionally or not in something with altered optical behavior. Not randomness, not chaos, not pulverized grains baked by solar heating, coating. That's why pattern recognition software flagged it. Algorithms written originally to detect artificial architecture on Mars and the Moon didn't simply detect interesting shapes. They detected non-random shape distribution. Statistical deviation, this extreme doesn't casually happen. It is the fingerprint of organization. And here is where the viewer must take a breath, because if you look at those frames long enough, there's a moment where your brain stops trying to fit them into rock category. Your intuition shifts. You start seeing panels, segments, units, a surface made not to exist, but to function. And that shift, that moment of conversion, is the point of no return. This is no longer about object classification. This is now about intent. Move your attention downward, away from the hexagonal surface, and the strangeness doesn't weaken. It escalates. Along the equatorial band, there are circular openings spaced with a rhythm that looks suspiciously intentional. These aren't jagged collapse pits like we see on Mars. They aren't the irregular mouths of lava tubes like on the Moon. They're nearly perfect circles, 7 of them visible, each roughly the size of a city block. Smooth edges, consistent diameter, and shadow modeling that suggests depth, not shallow pitting. Real void, real internal volume. Features that look more like ports, intakes, or apertures, not fractures. Planetary formation doesn't do this. Natural erosion doesn't do this. Collisions don't produce this kind of symmetry. The shadows inside these openings are what make researchers uneasy. They fall cleanly, like the surfaces inside are uniform, not chaotic rock. And when light hit at oblique angles, reconstruction suggests that these cavities don't just descend a dozen meters, they plunge deep into the object's interior. That implies structure inside the body, not just surface weirdness. Many are drawing parallels to something like pressure chambers, maintenance access conduits, or cooling intakes. They hesitate to say it publicly, but the mental association is immediate. This is the moment where seasoned researchers started privately using the word architecture. They won't say dock, they won't say vent, they won't say module, but the unspoken implication is unavoidable. If those openings align with internal voids detected through muon penetration models, then we're no longer dealing with a monolithic icy chunk. We're dealing with an internal cavity large enough to matter, large enough to be purposeful, or large enough to store something. Think about that. If this thing has internal structure, then surface analysis is just the mask. The real significance could be inside. And if there is an inside, then there is a design principle. Something this precise isn't shaped by randomness. Something this consistent doesn't emerge by accident. And that means the next question isn't, what are those holes, but why were they made? But the feature that experts keep returning to, the one that feels like the most blatant violation of natural formation, is the cylindrical extension trailing from 3I Atlas's rear hemisphere. No comet in the asteroid catalog, no Kuiper belt body, no dormant Centaur object, nothing in all the missions we've sent through the inner or outer system has ever shown anything remotely like it. A perfect cylinder 110 meters in width, 300 meters in length, not fragmented, not broken, not melted, not sheared, attached, aligned, smooth, uniform, ending in a rounded cap. It looks less like geology and more like hardware. If someone extracted this shape in isolation, stripped context, and showed it to an aerospace engineer, which some researchers actually did, the first question wasn't, what asteroid did this come from? The first question was, fuel tank or booster stage? Natural bodies simply don't extrude cylinders. There is no physics-based mechanism that selects for that geometry. Collisions produce chaos. Outgassing produces jets' ephemeral plumes, not welded shafts. Rotational forces produce flattening, not precision tubes. The cylinder is the most damning morphological clue because it implies external function, not internal evolution. A cylinder is a storage unit, a propulsion unit, a transmission chamber, a resonant chamber. In every known application of engineered geometry, biological or mechanical cylinders are purposeful. And here's where the psychological discomfort hits. One anomalous feature could be misinterpretation. 2 anomalous features could be coincidence. But now we're stacking impossible geometry, hexagonal paneling, circular apertures, and a cylinder. 3 different geometries, 3 different regularities, 3 different failure points for randomness. If even one of these features were found on a terrestrial archaeological site, we'd immediately label it constructed. The fact that all 3 appear on an object drifting between stars pushes us toward a conclusion that humanity has not been emotionally prepared to handle. Which means this protrusion may not just be a detail, it may be the central clue. The shape that refuses to be explained away. The piece that breaks the cosmic rock narrative so definitively that even the most conservative voices are starting to whisper the one hypothesis no one wants to say out loud. This object is not just weird, it's engineered. If the surface geometry wasn't enough to destabilize expectations, the coma composition finishes the job, because this part is not subjective interpretation, this part is chemistry. Spectroscopy is brutally honest. It doesn't care about narrative. It doesn't care about hype. It doesn't care what we hope this object is or isn't. It just reports what wavelengths are being absorbed and emitted. And that data tells a story that is even harder to explain than the geometry. 3I Atlas, appears to be venting a coma made of 96% carbon dioxide with almost no water vapor detected. That alone should trigger alarms. Comets, real comets, are overwhelmingly water ice driven. Carbon dioxide is present, yes, but as a side volatile. Here it's the dominant volatile. And the coma doesn't stream away from the sun like it should. Instead of forming a tail that aligns with solar wind pressure gradients, the coma sits around the object like a halo. Symmetrical, contained, controlled. That is not how sublimation behaves. That is how containment behaves. The models don't line up. Thermodynamics doesn't line up. Formation scenarios don't line up. You would need an interstellar nursery with physical conditions unlike anything studied in our galactic neighborhood. Or you'd need selective retention or selective depletion based on process, not accident. Meaning, either something removed the water and left the CO2 on purpose, or this object originated in a chemical environment that violates what we've spent decades charting. And here's the subtle detail. The coma's consistency implies the gas isn't simply boiling off in chaotic bursts. It's being released in a way that maintains symmetry around the object. That looks like control. That looks like regulated exhaust. That looks like thermal management. This is where researchers start getting uncomfortable, not because they're jumping to aliens, but because they have run out of normal explanations to hide behind. Once you eliminate the comfortable, you are forced to deal with the absurd. And the most absurd conclusion of all is the one we've been trained not to say publicly. This thing isn't acting like a rock at all. It's acting like a system. Now, we reach the part that nobody in the mainstream science community wants to discuss publicly, not because it's sensational, but because it's uncomfortable. ESA released their frames. They didn't hide them. They didn't stall for 6 months. They didn't redact or downgrade. They published. But NASA, the agency with the most powerful Mars orbit imaging system in existence, has not published a single pixel. Not a teaser frame, not a calibration image, not even a processing in progress placeholder. And remember, HiRISE is capable of resolving structural detail far smaller than ESA's instruments. If ESA's images already show paneling, ports, and cylindrical geometry, then logically, NASA saw even more. So the silence becomes signal. Silence becomes data. Silence becomes the anomaly. In information theory, this is called negative evidence. The absence of expected output is itself a measurable deviation. Because NASA does not behave like this for routine observations. There is a predictable rhythm to data release. Space agencies are slow, but they're slow consistently. Planetary scientists don't let the most valuable high-resolution data on an interstellar visitor just sit on a server, untouched, unscheduled, unaddressed, especially not when the object is days away from perihelion. That is exactly the moment when scientists rush to publish to secure citation priority, to secure discovery credit, to secure professional legacy. Instead, silence. So two explanations remain, and both are disturbing in different ways. Option 1, the data is catastrophically corrupt or unusable, but that's inconsistent with the known reliability of MRO hardware. Option 2, the images contain detail so anomalous, so disruptive, so category-breaking that NASA needs time not to process pixels but to process narrative, to decide how to say what those frames show, to coordinate messaging so that a planetary-scale paradigm shift doesn't detonate panic or geopolitical instability. And you don't hold back boring data, you only hold back world-altering data. Which leads to the most haunting question in this entire story, the one that is now unavoidable. What did NASA see that made silence safer than truth? At this point, we reach a binary fork. All exotic speculation aside, the situation collapses into only two logical categories. Either 3I, Atlas, is the result of natural processes. We have never encountered processes so radically alien that they don't just tweak our models, they obliterate them, or this object is not natural. Every layer of data forces us toward that fork. The geometry suggests organized segmentation. The equatorial apertures suggest intentional penetration into interior volume. The cylindrical extension suggests engineered purpose. The coma suggests controlled ejection rather than chaotic sublimation. The chemistry suggests a selective environment or selective retention mechanism. And NASA's silence suggests content too disruptive for routine scientific publishing. These are not marginal anomalies, these are categorical violations. The exotic natural hypothesis would require physics that borders on magic. A formation nursery so cold, so unique, and so chemically inverted that CO2 condenses where water does not. A fracture process that produces hexagonal symmetry. A void evolution that produces precisely circular tubes spaced like design ports. A jet dynamics regime that produces symmetrical discharge. A thermal regime that produces reflective coatings unknown to known mineral taxonomy. But if nature can do all of this in one object, then our entire understanding of cosmochemistry is broken at the root. The alternative is simpler and more terrifying. Something built this, not necessarily recently, not necessarily intentionally aimed at Earth, not necessarily still functional, but built, constructed, engineered, maybe millions of years ago, maybe by a civilization long extinct, maybe by something whose existence we have incorrectly assumed to be impossible because we have never photographed their artifacts before. If this is artificial, then this is archaeological evidence on a cosmic scale. This isn't a signal. This isn't ambiguous radio noise. This isn't a mathematical curiosity. This is hardware. Something physical. Something with edges and modules and cavities. Something that was designed to do something. And when you think like that, the hexagons become tiles. The apertures become access points. The protrusion becomes infrastructure. The coma becomes output. That is the moment where denial becomes irrational. And now we arrive at the ticking clock, the moment where this story exits analysis and enters observation. In 5 days, 3I, Atlas, will hit perihelion, its closest approach to the Sun, the thermal stress test that comets cannot cheat their way through. In every historical precedent, perihelion exposure is a filter. Fragile bodies fragment. Unstable nuclei rupture. Outgassing becomes chaotic. Tails flare. You can hide structure at 29 million kilometers. You can hide internal cavities through clever inference. But you cannot hide from stellar heat. The Sun exposes what simulation cannot. And that's why every observatory, from the Atacama Desert to the Keck Arrays to space-based platforms like JWST, will be aimed directly at this visitor when that moment hits. Perihelion is the turning point. If 3I ATLAS disintegrates into rubble, then maybe the most extreme natural but exotic hypothesis survives another day. But if it holds integrity, if the surface segments remain stable, if those apertures persist, if that cylindrical protrusion does not shear or fracture, then the artificial scenario gains weight so quickly that denial becomes almost superstitious. And there is a third possibility, the one no one wants to speak aloud. What if 3I Atlas uses perihelion not as a death phase, but as a maneuver window? What if it adjusts trajectory using the Sun's gravity well? Because slight adjustments at perihelion amplify dramatically over interplanetary distances. Spacecraft use it. Gravity assist is real. And if this thing performs any form of course correction, the debate ends instantly. Even the most conservative physicists agree, perihelion is decisive. These next 5 days are not academic. They are historic. We're not waiting for a press conference. We're waiting for a result. Nature or engineering, chaos or intention, rock or system, no simulation can hide what the Sun will reveal, and that's why silence feels like pressure. It's not a passive absence, it is the world holding its breath. Because the moment this object swings through the inner heliosphere, we will learn something true, not inferred, not rumored, not speculated. Observed. This is not years away. This is not for future generations. This is 5 days. And when those 5 days are over, our place in the universe may not resemble the story we believed yesterday. And now we arrive at the ticking clock, the moment where this story exits analysis and enters observation. In 5 days, 3I Atlas will hit perihelion, its closest approach to the Sun, the thermal stress test that comets cannot cheat their way through. In every historical precedent, perihelion exposure is a filter. Fragile bodies fragment, unstable nuclei rupture, outgassing becomes chaotic, tails flare. You can hide structure at 29 million kilometers. You can hide internal cavities through clever inference. But you cannot hide from stellar heat. The sun exposes what simulation cannot. And that's why every observatory from the Atacama Desert to the Keck arrays to space-based platforms like JWST will be aimed directly at this visitor when that moment hits. Perihelion is the turning point. If 3I Atlas disintegrates into rubble, then maybe the most extreme natural but exotic hypothesis survives another day. But if it holds integrity, if the surface segments remain stable, if those apertures persist, if that cylindrical protrusion does not shear or fracture, then the artificial scenario gains weight so quickly that denial becomes almost superstitious. And there is a third possibility, the one no one wants to speak aloud. What if 3I Atlas uses perihelion not as a death phase, but as a maneuver window? What if it adjusts trajectory, using the sun's gravity well? Because slight adjustments at perihelion amplify dramatically over interplanetary distances. Spacecraft use it. Gravity assist is real. And if this thing performs any form of course correction, the debate ends instantly. Even the most conservative physicists agree. Perihelion is decisive. These next 5 days are not academic. They are historic. We're not waiting for a press conference, we're waiting for a result. Nature or engineering, chaos or intention, rock or system, no simulation can hide what the sun will reveal. And that's why silence feels like pressure. It's not a passive absence, it is the world holding its breath. Because the moment this object swings through the inner heliosphere, we will learn something true. Not inferred, not rumored, not speculated, observed. This is not years away. This is not for future generations. This is 5 days. And when those 5 days are over, our place in the universe may not resemble the story we believed yesterday. So, here we are. Time is no longer theoretical, speculative, or comfortably abstract. We have days, not decades. We have images, not rumors. We have geometry, not ambiguity. ESA's data already forced every careful scientist to confront something uncomfortable. This object is violating category boundaries with mathematical precision. And when category boundaries break, paradigms break with them. We can argue about interpretation. We can debate probabilities. We can stall behind language, anomalous, unprecedented, unexplained. But the truth is simpler than words will comfortably admit. What we are seeing does not behave like geology. It behaves like design, and design implies agency. Somewhere, sometime, by something. Maybe 3I Atlas is an artifact drifting long after its creators vanished, cosmic debris from an extinct civilization whose machines outlived their makers by eons. Maybe it is dormant technology waiting for some environmental trigger. Maybe it is nothing more than a relic, like a lost fragment of interstellar infrastructure torn loose from a construction lattice near another star. Or maybe, and this is the scenario that makes government silence more logical than reckless, maybe it is not dormant at all. Maybe it is observing us exactly the way we are observing it. But regardless of origin, speculation ends soon. Nature is about to run the experiment for us. The sun is the control variable, the stress test, the universal truth detector. If this object is ordinary, it will shatter. If it is not, it will endure. And if it maneuvers even by millimeters, then the conversation moves from possibility to confirmation. Humanity has waited centuries for the moment when the question, "Are we alone?" stops being philosophy and becomes data. That moment isn't coming someday. It's coming now. In real time, in this week. During this perihelion, look at the images yourself. Look at the symmetry. Look at the precision. Look at the silence from the agency that should be speaking loudest. Because the universe may have already answered the question. And the answer might be staring back at us.